Beige Ninja. Sasuyo Migato, raise your head. You have completed your training bravely. I, Sasuyo Dojun, the first elder, officially induct you into the Aoi Clan. As your first mission, you will be conducting surveillance of a meeting of the Beige. Here are your mission documents. Prevail with your heart, my son. The elder placed his hands upon Migato's head. Migato breathed softly as he rose. He clutched the folded scroll in his fist as he turned to exit the podium. He felt his heart began to race. The smallest of tasks bears the finest of results, he said to himself as he walked towards the housing plot. Migato unveiled the scroll and began to read. Post at V23W D31S. A barn lost in the grove of trees is to be observed at dawn. Return before the sun rises. Migato rolled up the scroll and walked to the edge of a small room and placed it upon a grill. He stared until every scrap was ashes. The darkness grew softer as Migato gathered himself. A creaking sound echoed through the grove. With his eyes locked on the barn, Migato concentrated and drew his target to him. It seemed as if he was standing directly at the door. He saw a flash of sparkling as the sky grew deep orange. The long beige hairs of the enemy sprouted from the door and disappeared into the grove. Migato dashed as quietly as he could, taking a slithering path versus a direct path back to the encampment, in case he had been made. He heard an unmistakable sound and stopped dead in his tracks. Sweat began to run down his face and his heart pounded. He slowly turned around but saw nothing. He knew it was not his imagination. No one could mistake that sound. He crouched to the ground and recalled the direction of the sound. He slowly looked towards it as a glimmer appeared in the distance. Is this how I die? Migato thought to himself. My first mission and not even combat. He let out a silent sigh. His ears perked as he heard a sound in the distance. He closed his mind to all but his ears and drew the sound to him. Master. A gargle of a voice. Calm yourself. He covered his mouth, and tears began to fall down his face. Father? He thought to himself as he tried to regain his composure. Before the sun rises, he said to himself, and bolted for the encampment with no regard for secrecy. Migato, you have returned, the head captain shouted as he ran towards Migato. What's going on? Migato asked, even though he knew the answer. All 5 elders have disappeared. The fort has been in disarray for days. Migato calmly raised his head to the sky. You wanted a challenge, right? He scoffed at himself. Gargalek, the head captain froze and looked at Migato's eyes. Please give me your katana. Gargalek nodded and slowly removed his sword, sash, and handed it to Migato. I have never heard you call my name. Prevail with your heart. He lowered his head. Migato entered the grand chapel, his heart and head on one goal. He carefully unsheathed Zangetsu and knelt at the altar, sliding the sword along a crevice. Silently the altar rose. Migato stepped into the passage and began to ascend the stone stairs. To think I would ever return here to kill you, not because you were killed, Migato whispered as he entered a glass chamber lit by ultraviolet light. Do you remember what I told you that day? Aoi in the ancient tongue means blue. The ultraviolet light of this chamber is the symbol of our clan. It has shined for 300 years under our family's trust. So I must ask, Sasuyo Dojin, are you the master of the Beige? Dojin lifted his head and closed his eyes. There was once a time I knew I could not do this. Now I know. Migato jerked his head to the left. A small sting on his eyebrow proved his determination. A line of blood slowly trickled down Migato's cheek. He reached to his kunai and carefully tossed it. It bounced off the wall and collided with Dojin's kunai. I see you perfected your blind spot. Let's make this fun. Dojin flexed his fist, and the silver knuckles of Sasuyo clasped around his fists. Migato kicked backwards and hit the hilt of Zangetsu, causing it to ricochet off the wall. It landed in front of Migato as he clasped his hands around it and struck it into the floor. He winced as he felt his left thumb break. He thrust the sword upwards and to the right as he spun left. The second fist slammed against his blade. Migato was thrown backwards. He raised his right foot and it struck the wall. He used his left foot to redirect his momentum and stabbed forward. Dojin raised his elbows to counter, but Migato slammed his right foot into the ground, causing him to jump into the air. Dojin smiled as he thrust his right leg upwards. Migato braced and bent his legs as he hit the ceiling. "How dare you!" Migato shouted. "Zangetsu Tensho!" Migato flipped in the air and spun downwards. His heart almost stopped as his father clapped onto his blade. "At least I went out with everything I had," he whispered. "You pass." Dojin lightly placed his son upon the ground and released his blade. The far wall of the cloister began to open and the four elders walked out before Migato. Migato fell to his knees, tears streaming from his eyes. He released Zangetsu and punched the ground with his broken hand. The pain shot through him and he embraced it. "I cannot understand how you feel," Dojin said as he sat down beside Migato. He wrapped his arm around him and pulled him to his chest. "I have a favor to ask. As I said, there was once a time I knew I could not do this. Now I know. Will you help us save the Aoi and perhaps many more?" Migato slowly calmed himself and wiped his eyes, sniffling as he looked up at his father. "Prevail through heart. It is more than a saying or even a way of life. It is to be true to yourself in all ways. I feel as though the world is about to be dumped upon my shoulders." Migato pushed away from Dojin and stood up. "I will do what is in my power, First Elder. The Beige are not our enemy. They are us. Our enemy are the Grey. The nature of our enemy is truly terrible. We do not know our enemy, for if we did, he would know us. To defeat him, we have to cast our own upon him. The nature of prevail through heart is our greatest weapon. Your mission is as your acts today have been, to realize the corruption and hatred in the Grey and fight against it with every part of your being. In the light cloister, just beyond that door, is a statue veiled in ultraviolet light. Once the light no longer reaches the statue, it will be visible. If you look upon it, you will know our enemy, and you will become our enemy." Migato turned to face the door. He nodded and walked inside. The door closed behind him, the blue tint began to dim, and a small statue began to appear upon the wall. As Migato looked upon it, his hand exploded in pain. He tried to grab it, but he was paralyzed. A darkness began to swell in his mind. A terror he had never known struck him like a lightning bolt, and he tried to scream. "Mine!" A voice in his head made his feet give out. He tumbled to the ground and struggled for air. A thick smog of darkness began to engulf him. "Live well. Seek the light." The memory of his mother's last words sprouted from his mind and eased the pain. He writhed on the floor as his vision darkened. "I will make you proud," he said to himself, feeling a warm tear fall down his cheek and a faint smile on his lips as he fell into darkness.